There are moments in life when the weight of pain feels too heavy to carry, when silence becomes louder than words, and the heart asks, why me? Yet, in those very moments when life feels shattered, something sacred begins to stir. Hope. Hope doesn't always arrive as a miracle in the sky. Sometimes it appears quietly like a whisper in the soul, reminding you that endings are not always final, and brokenness can become the birthplace of strength. There was a woman named Elena who lost everything in a single year: her job, her marriage, and her home. Nights were spent in the backseat of her car, praying for sleep to come before the tears did. She didn't have money, but she had a Bible her grandmother once gave her. One night, overwhelmed with despair, she opened it to Isaiah 43:2. When you pass through deep waters, I will be with you. That verse didn't erase her pain, but it gave her breath to survive another day. Slowly, people came into her life, strangers who became helping hands. A shelter took her in, a counselor guided her healing, and a small church offered her a chance to start over. Elena now works helping other women rebuild their lives, and she always says, "Hope didn't save me in a moment. It saved me one heartbeat at a time." Hope is not the absence of suffering. It is the courage to believe that suffering is not the end. There was a man named Jonathan who spent most of his life believing he was strong enough to face anything alone. But when his small business collapsed and debt swallowed every dollar he had, he felt something he had never felt before: helplessness. He stopped answering calls, avoided friends, and sat for hours staring at the floor, wondering if his existence still had meaning. One cold evening, while walking with no destination, he passed by an old church. The door was open, light spilling from inside as if inviting him in. He hesitated. He hadn't prayed in years, but something inside nudged him to step through the door. No pastor approached him. No choir sang. There was only quiet and a wooden cross at the front of the room. Jonathan didn't know what to say. He simply sat in the back row and whispered, "I don't even know if you hear me, but I need help." That single shaky prayer didn't solve his problems overnight, but it broke the wall around his heart. The next day, someone he once helped years ago unexpectedly reached out and offered him a small job. Then another opportunity came. Then another. He began rebuilding, not just his finances, but his faith. Years later, he said, "My life didn't change when I got the job. It changed the moment I stopped pretending I didn't need help." Hope often begins not with noise, but with surrender. Maria was a single mother of two, working double shifts at a small diner just to afford rent. When the company suddenly downsized, she lost her only source of income. Bills piled up, and the fear of losing her children to poverty haunted her every night. She tried to stay strong in front of them, but when they were asleep, she would sit on the kitchen floor, holding her face in her hands, wondering where hope had gone. One evening, her neighbor, an elderly woman who barely knew her, knocked on the door with a warm meal. Maria tried to decline out of pride, but the woman gently said, "Even the strongest trees bend before they break." That simple act of kindness cracked open a space in Maria's heart where despair had taken root. The neighbor later connected her to a community organization that offered temporary financial support and helped her apply for new work. Within weeks, Maria found a job at a local bakery that allowed flexible hours and stability. She started bringing home small treats for her kids, and their laughter began to replace her silent crying. Maria often says, "God didn't send me money. He sent me people." Her story is a reminder that hope is sometimes delivered in human form, through compassion, timing, and the courage to reach out when someone is falling. There was a young man named Daniel who seemed to have everything: friends, a good job, and a promising future. But beneath the surface, anxiety and depression gnawed at his soul like an unseen storm. He didn't tell anyone. He laughed in public and broke down in silence. Nights were the hardest, the thoughts, the pressure, the feeling of drowning in his own mind. He believed no one would understand. One night, sitting alone in his room, he thought about ending it all. But before he acted on it, his phone buzzed. It was a childhood friend he hadn't spoken to in years. The message was simple: "You crossed my mind today. Are you okay?" That question felt like a hand reaching through the darkness. Daniel didn't open up immediately, but that small moment pulled him back from the edge. His friend guided him toward counseling and reminded him that asking for help doesn't make someone weak, it makes them human. Slowly, Daniel began to heal. He learned to breathe through the pain, to pray even when the words felt heavy, and to let people walk beside him. Now he speaks publicly about mental health and faith, telling others, God doesn't always shout. Sometimes he whispers through the people we least expect. Hope may not erase the darkness instantly, but it can light a path through it. Grace was a woman of gentle spirit, known for her kindness and her unwavering belief in God. But when her husband died unexpectedly in a car accident, her world shattered. The silence of the house screamed louder than any noise. Every room held a memory. Every night felt like a storm without rain. People offered condolences, but none of their words reached the ache in her chest. For weeks, she stopped going to church and stopped singing the hymns she once loved. She wasn't angry at God. She just didn't know how to talk to him anymore. One Sunday, she walked past her church without planning to go in. But the choir was rehearsing "It Is Well With My Soul," the hymn her husband used to hum while doing chores. She froze at the doorway, tears spilling down her face. She sat alone at the back, not singing, just listening. Something inside her shifted. Not the pain, but the belief that pain didn't have to steal her faith. Slowly, she returned to the things she once did, praying at dawn, visiting her neighbors, and writing letters of encouragement. Grace now leads a support group for widows and tells them, losing someone you love doesn't mean you lost God. Sometimes, he stands closer in the ruins than in the celebrations. Hope doesn't deny grief. It walks with it. Amir grew up in a village that was torn apart by war. He was only 12 when his family fled their home with nothing but a small bag and a prayer. They walked for days, hiding among trees, sleeping in abandoned buildings, and sharing scraps of food. Fear was constant, but his mother always whispered, "As long as we breathe, hope breathes with us." Eventually, they reached a refugee camp where survival meant enduring overcrowding, hunger, and uncertainty. Amir often felt invisible, just another displaced soul in a world too busy to care. But one volunteer, a former teacher, noticed his curiosity and handed him a worn-out notebook and a pencil. "Write your dream," she said, "even if the world around you is broken." Amir began studying with other children in a makeshift classroom. Years later, he earned a scholarship and eventually became a translator for humanitarian groups. He used his voice to help others who were once like him, lost, scared, and searching for a reason to keep going. Today, he says, "I didn't survive because the world became kinder. I survived because hope refused to leave me, even in the darkest places." Hope is not the denial of reality. It is the decision to believe there is more beyond the pain. After returning from war, Michael was not the same man who had left home. He carried invisible wounds, flashbacks, nightmares, and guilt over the lives he could not save. His family tried to comfort him, but he felt like a burden. He isolated himself, convinced the world no longer had a place for him. The tears he never cried on the battlefield finally came in the silence of his bedroom. One day he met a pastor who had once been a soldier too. The pastor didn't preach, judge, or offer cliches. He simply listened. He introduced Michael to a small group of veterans who gathered weekly to share and heal together. For the first time, Michael felt seen by people who understood his pain. He began volunteering to help other veterans transition back to civilian life. The more he served, the lighter his own burden became. He realized that his survival wasn't meaningless. It was an assignment. Michael often says, "God didn't save me to stay silent. He saved me to lift others who are drowning in the darkness I knew too well." Hope doesn't always erase the scars, but it gives them purpose. Sophie had always dreamed of becoming a musician. Music was more than passion, it was her language. But life had other plans. Her father fell critically ill, and she set aside her dreams to care for him. The years passed, and by the time she tried to return to music, doors were closed, auditions rejected her, and people told her she was too late. One night, she played her guitar in the quiet of her room and cried, believing her purpose had expired. The next day, a neighbor heard her playing through the open window and asked if she'd perform at a small community event. She almost said no, but something in her heart whispered, "Try again." Her performance moved people to tears. A local charity asked her to sing for hospice patients. Soon she was invited to record songs for spiritual healing programs and trauma centers. She never became a celebrity, but she became a source of comfort to hundreds of souls. She says, "My dream didn't die. It transformed." God didn't take it away. He redirected it. Hope is not the end of a dream, but the rebirth of it in a new form. A small town was devastated after a wildfire swept through the valley, burning homes, memories, and livelihoods. Families stood in the ashes of what used to be their lives, silent and stunned. Many thought the town would become another forgotten tragedy, another place the world would move on from. But the people didn't scatter. They stayed. Neighbors shared tents, food, blankets, and tears. Churches opened their doors. Volunteers arrived from other cities with supplies, tools, and open arms. They didn't come with pity, they came with hope. Slowly, homes were rebuilt. A new school rose where the old one had crumbled. A mural was painted on a restored community center with the words, "From ashes we rise." What began as disaster became testimony. One resident said, "We didn't just rebuild houses. We rebuilt each other." Hope is not the absence of fire. It is the belief that life can still bloom in the ash. Not all stories of hope end in triumph for the person living them, but their impact survives in others. Mr. Lewis was a teacher who battled cancer for years. Even when he grew weaker, he continued mentoring students, reminding them that their future mattered more than his pain. His voice was calm, his faith unwavering. One day a student asked, "Aren't you afraid?" He smiled and replied, "Faith doesn't always heal the body, but it heals the fear." After his passing, dozens of former students gathered at the school to honor him. Many said they pursued their dreams because he believed in them when no one else did. Scholarships were created in his name. His words continued to echo long after he was gone. Hope is not always measured by how long you live, but by how deeply your life touches others. When life breaks you, hope restores, not by erasing pain, but by reshaping it into purpose.